Hello. Today we'll go back on character sheets and item management. The way I wrote this character sheet, items appear in the order in which they're added to the sheet, but players might want a bit more freedom in how they organize their sheets. Fortunately, Foundry has an easy solution for that, which requires certain elements of the sheet to be given specific CSS classes. First of all the items you want to be able to reorder need to be given an item class. Thankfully, we've already done that everywhere, like I'm showing here with the weapon card template. The next bit you need is in the element that contains said items. For weapons, we've defined this in the template for the character sheet as a section called weapon list. To this element, we're going to add a class called item list. And that's it. I'm not kidding. If we go to Foundry and open a character sheet, we can now drag and drop weapons to reorder them. Okay, but how does this work exactly? Drag and drop actions are handled by instances of a class called DragDrop, where you can define what's draggable, where it can be dropped, whether it can be dragged or dropped, and what happens when you do. The application class takes care of some of that setup by binding a few callbacks that will be overridden in the child classes. That's only half the setup though, and it leaves the defining of the drag and drop selectors to the application's options via its drag drop property. For instance, if we go over to the actor sheet class, we can see that it's by default set to item list and item. This is what makes the item elements draggable in the character sheet. If I'm reading the code correctly, setting the drop selector to null means the object can be dropped anywhere in the sheet. Now let's take a look at what the onDrop method does in the actor sheet. First, it's grabbing the data that's about to be dropped, in our case an object containing information about an item. Then we're giving the system or module a chance to do something by calling hooks to the drop actor sheet data event. If the hook allowed the drop to continue, we then route to different callback depending on the type of data being dropped. This callback can of course be overridden by your custom sheet. For instance, onDrop actor does nothing by default, but in 5e it's used to enable polymorphism. Let's take a look at onDrop item. As usual with that kind of operation, we first check that the user dropping the item is allowed to do so. Then we have to reconstruct the item object from the event data before we can look at it. If the item we're dropping is one that the actor already owns, then we're probably trying to reorder a list of items. If not, then it likely means we're trying to add this item to the character sheet, so let's create it. Now you know how owned items get created when you drag and drop an item from the item directory to the actor sheet. But what I'm interested in today is the sorting function, so let's see what it does. It starts by finding the item we've just dropped, and all the items of the same type that aren't it. Then it's finding the drop target, which is the HTML element of the actor sheet on which we've dropped our item. If the items are of the same type, we perform the sort by reordering the item collection so that the dropped item is now before the one we dropped it on. This is all well and good, but in the Feng Shui 2 character sheet, there are two instances where I need to do things differently. First of all, in the additional gear section, I'm mixing several item types, and I want to be able to reorder them however I want. So what I can do is override the onSortItem method in my custom named character sheet class and test the type of the item being dropped. If it's an armor or a vehicle, we'll do something custom, which we'll write shortly. Otherwise, we call the parent method. Back to our special case, I'm essentially going to duplicate the content of the parent method and remove the tests that prevent sorting different item types. And that's it. Now I can sort my additional gear in whatever order. You may need to restart the world rather than just refresh it to see it working. So that was instance number 1. The second place where I need to do unconventional sorting is in the shtick list. As you know, shticks are displayed over 2 columns, but at the moment they are distributed alternating between one column and the other, which sometimes leads to visual imbalance as some shticks have longer description than others. But because conventional sorting operates on the overall item collection, it's not really going to do what I want, so I need to do something custom if I want the ability to choose which column a shtick goes in. First of all, I'm going to add some data attributes to my toLists. I'm going to call the attribute side, set it to 0 for the left side, and 1 for the right side. I'm also ensuring that the divs have the item list selector to enable the drag and drop behavior. Next, I'll add a new case to my custom onSortItem method, checking whether the item is a shtick. In this situation, it's important it's placed just above the default case. Inside, we start by doing some jQuery to get the side attribute that's closest to the place in the form where we drop the object, defaulting to 0 if we can't find it. We then set a flag to that value, which we will read later to place the shtick in the correct list. Finally, we deliberately let the switch fall through to the default case, which will sort the shtick in the correct position. Over in the sheets get data, we need to change how we populate the odd shticks and even shticks list. I should probably rename these properties, but I'll do that off camera. I'm going to remove those filters and instead initialize those arrays to be empty. Then I'm going to use the for loop below, which is already going through the list of shticks. Now I'm testing the value of the flag I defined earlier. If it's set to 1, I'll add the shtick to the odd list, aka the one on the right. Otherwise, I'll add it to the list on the left. Note I'm using an optional chaining operator in this test because it's possible that the flag isn't set yet. With that done, I can now rearrange a character's shticks however I want. However, you'll note that because of what we've done, all existing actors now have all their shticks in the first column. The nice thing to do would be to write a migration script to restore them to the way they were before, but that will be your homework. Also, if I add a new shtick from the item directory, it will always add it to the left-hand side. This can be addressed by overriding onDropItem and setting the flag after the onItem is created, but I'm feeling too lazy to do this right now, so that will be your second piece of homework. There's one more thing I want to do before ending this video. If you've played around with the Foundry System, you might have noticed that you can drag elements of your character sheet, such as weapons and spells, into the hotbar for easy access to them. Remember that hotbar buttons are nothing more than calls to macros, and in traditional Foundry fashion of not making assumption on how this should work, this doesn't come for free and you have to write it yourself. As usual in those cases, we're going to draw inspiration from how Foundry does it. Inside the ready hook, we'll add another hook listening to the hotbar drop event and binding it to a function createRollItemMacro, which we'll leave in the macros files we created a few episodes ago. We'll create this function later, but let's first think about what this macro should be doing, and to do that we can dissect the rollItemMacro function from Foundry. Ultimately, all we're trying to do is just to call an item's roll function. The challenge is to identify and retrieve the item. Foundry chooses to identify items by name. Comes with its issues, like what if you have more than one item with that name and which one you use matters, but the trade-off is that people can write macros by hand if they want to, which also makes it easier for testing. Foundry also ensures that you can only use the macro if you're controlling an actor that owns an item of that name. This test isn't strictly necessary, but it reduces the chances of user errors such as making an attack roll with the wrong stats because you had a different token selected. There are similar concerns in Foundry, so I think I'm just going to copy that function as is for now. Now, all that's left to do is to create the rollItemMacro function, which again is going to be a straight copy of the createFoundry function, so let's have a look at what it does. It starts with checking that what we're dropping onto the hotbar is an onItem. Then it constructs the macro command. We'll obviously have to change that to match our system name. As Foundry caches macros, if there's already one that does the same thing we want, we'll just reuse it. Otherwise, we'll create a new one, specifying its name and type, assigning it the item's icon as an image, and setting the command. Foundry also seems to add a flag identifying the macro as an item macro. As far as I can tell, this isn't used anywhere, but I guess it might be useful for things like migration scripts. Once we retrieved or created the macro, we can assign it to the hotbar. And finally, we return false to prevent the default handling of the drop event on the hotbar, which is used for dropping existing macros, for instance from a compendium. And that is it. I can now drag weapons, shticks, and gear onto the hotbar and roll those directly. Note that in my case, while skills technically work, the macro fails because I haven't defined a chat template for skills. I can either make one, prevent skills from being dropped in the hotbar by checking item type on drop, or I could modify the item.roll function so that rolling a skill immediately triggers a skill check. I think I'm going to do the latter. I have a situation where I want to do more advanced drag and dropping, but that's going to require a lot of setup, so that will get its own video. Until next time, bye!